EPA NPDES audits, lessons from Ecology and several Phase I permittees. This is a topic that we had a lot of questions about. People were somewhat aware of the audits, but not much about the details. So the panel was kind enough to join us and share some of the lessons. So we're going to go through a brief introduction, and then from Rachel, I'll introduce everyone in a second, and then we'll hear a little bit about the process so everyone can talk, and then the outcomes, and then a wrap-up. So please welcome our panel members, Rachel McCrea from the Department of Ecology, Lorna Mauren from the City of Tacoma, Doug Navetski from King County, Bill Leif from Snohomish County, and Kate Rhoads from the City of Seattle.
So I'm going to cover just a little bit of contextual stuff first before we get into the details about the Phase I's individual experiences. Really, what is an audit and some context behind the EPA audits. So an audit is an evaluation of compliance just like a site inspection, like for a construction site or an industrial site, but it involves more of a programmatic review, more programmatic information than you typically find at an individual site or location or activity. An audit can also provide feedback to the regulator, the permit writer, about how well a particular language is playing out as it really works out on the ground. So that provides feedback to the, in this case, the Department of Ecology or EPA. So at this point, Ecology has not conducted audits to date. It was our practice, as most of you know, for the first Phase II permit term to provide technical assistance to permittees to support your efforts to initiate and build those programs. Ecology intends to continue this practice as well as build in other mechanisms to assess compliance, including audits. Ecology has made no specific MS4 audit commitments, nor have we scheduled MS4 program audits. However, Ecology or EPA could audit any permittee at any time. An audit format generally starts with a records request that comes out maybe 1 to 2 months before the scheduled on-site audit. Once the on-site audit begins, it starts off with an opening conference, sort of an introductory meeting, good opportunity for managers to speak and hear about what's going to be happening for the next couple days. And then over the course of the audit, there are meetings and auditor-selected site visits. So those meetings, they're topic specific. It involves a lot of moving staff on one topic into a room, speaking to it, moving them out of the room, getting another set of staff in on a different topic. And those are essentially interviews. So the auditor is conducting interviews of individual staff, and it's also an opportunity for staff of the agencies or the departments to explain things that don't really go in writing very easily, databases, et cetera. And then the site visits, these are usually auditor selected. So in other words, you don't necessarily know where the auditors want to go before they want to go there. And they need to see your work. It is not a show and tell. So the example is you don't go out with an IDDE inspector and the auditor doesn't want to see the IDDE inspector say, you know, well, this is what I would do. No, it's about what do you do? And they want to see it in action. So it's not really a description of what you do, it's actually watching it happen. Then towards the end of the audit, there's an auditor team debrief. It gives a chance for the folks participating on the auditor team to kind of collect their thoughts and prepare for the closing conference. And then the closing conference is an opportunity for the auditor to say any obvious things, both good things and maybe obvious bad things that they encountered. And then, and certainly to thank the local governments for their time. And that is also another opportunity for those managers to attend and hear how things went. The audit is then followed up with an inspection report. So now let's look at what EPA was up to. Why did EPA conduct these Phase I audits? There was a national enforcement initiative in 2011 through 2013. EPA always has these. You can look on their website, you can Google it and say, what is their national enforcement initiative now? And so from 2011 to 2013, that was to keep raw sewage and contaminated stormwater out of our nation's waters. And that resulted in a focus on reducing CSOs and SSOs, which are sanitary sewer overflows, and assessing 75% of the Phase I MS4s by 2013. So since Washington State Phase I's had never been audited, they needed to be assessed. EPA Region 10 had funding for contractor resources to support Puget Sound activities. So EPA hired a national contractor. It was in this case PG Environmental. They do audits for EPA, different regions all around the nation. So they hired this national contractor to conduct the audits for the Puget Sound Phase I permittees. EPA staff audited Clark County themselves, Clark County not in Puget Sound. So that contractor does conduct audits all across the US, but it is a consulting firm. And it did result in an audit team for Washington that varied from audit to audit. And the staff conducting the audits did have varying familiarity with our permits in Washington State. Ecology's role for these audits was as a participant. We were a member of EPA's audit team. We were not, though, in a lead role. This means that we were a resource to EPA and their contractor to help interpret the permit requirements and certainly explain the related state-issued guidance that we have. For example, our stormwater management manuals, in this case for Western Washington, is not something that they experience in other states. So often they started running down a path about asking questions about a particular something associated with new and redevelopment controls, and it was sort of like, well, actually, you know, Ecology sets that requirement. Not worth your time, auditors, to go digging into that one. So let's see. Ecology, so we did not, therefore, as a participants, we didn't necessarily have control over the priorities that were identified for the audits, nor the logistics or the timing, and nor the conclusions of those audits. We did have the opportunity to correct factual errors found in the draft inspection reports. And Ecology used the team to get on-the-ground training on how to conduct audits for our municipal stormwater team. Let me just touch a little bit on the outcomes, and then I'll turn it over to these folks. In terms of how those outcomes were documented, there's been a lot of interest and questions around this. The contractor prepared an inspection report for each audit. That included observations from both their document review and the in-person audit and site inspections, photos, et cetera. EPA then prepared a cover transmittal with the findings that were related to compliance. And that cover transmittal does highlight some differences between EPA's compliance strategy and Ecology's compliance assurance approach. I'm going to explain a couple of things there. So EPA uses a notice of violation, and that is similar to Ecology's warning letter. It's an informal enforcement communication. EPA has a Section 308 information request, and that is similar to Ecology's notice of violation. And that is a formal enforcement-related action, and a response is required when you get a Section 308 information request. So EPA then documented the conclusion of each of these audits differently, and that it differed depending on the findings of the audit and on staff availability and triage. So with that, for context, I'll turn it over now to the rest of Phase I.
Cool. So I'm Lorna Mauren, City of Tacoma, NPDES Permit Manager, and Stormwater Manager also. Tacoma was the third to be audited following DOT and Pierce County. EPA and the contractor came out for 1 week, basically, and did Pierce County in the first 2 days and Tacoma in the second 2 days. So by the time they got to Tacoma, they were a little tired. But what I want to share, first of all, is the most valuable part of the audit, in my opinion, for Tacoma. And that was really the preparation. And I made some bullet points here because if I go off topic, it could end who knows when. So the audit, the existence of the audit provided inarguable justification to bring the departments responsible for implementing the permit together for discussion. That was pretty key, inarguable justification, and for you permit managers out there, I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about. The meetings were attended by workers and department heads, and in some cases, there were people in the meetings that really had not attended trainings or participated, I'll use that word, participated to a great extent, leaving staff or whoever is on the ground or at the site or whatever to take the lead. We held a series of meetings They started with broad, high-level meetings, essentially starting with the Clean Water Act and where the municipal permit fits into those. So it was a great education for everyone concerned. We also went down into really detailed meetings, site-specific meetings, sections of the Stormwater Management Program meetings, and we had mock audits conducted on some of the sites by our source control folks. There was really a sense of urgency to the whole preparation process. You know, not only did we get our letter of the day that we're coming, I think it was 30 days before they actually showed up or whatever. I guess it was the topics that they actually wanted to talk about. But there was a sense of urgency to the whole thing, and I think some of that urgency was immediately relatable to the fact that the auditors were unknown to us. We didn't know the folks from EPA, and we didn't know the consultants either, and so we really weren't exactly sure what to expect from all of that. So that's basically my comments.
Good morning. My name is Doug Navetski. I'm the NPDES permit coordinator for King County. I also am the manager of the Water Quality Compliance Unit, in which many of the activities for implementation of the stormwater permit requirements are housed. A lot of what Lorna has said is ditto for King County. We were the fifth of the set. We were able to talk to a lot of the jurisdictions and with WSDOT who had gone through the audit and kind of get lessons learned on what went right and what went wrong. One of the things I really want to emphasize about this audit was that it was a two-stage process. The first process being supplying documentation for all your various programs, and this included your records, your protocols, your standard operating procedures, all of these different documents. And it was a really good exercise to go through, especially with custodial agencies. Just a short sidebar explanation, King County has permit requirement activities residing in a multiple different number of agencies, which includes our wastewater division, our solid waste division, Parks Department, roads, airport transit, the such. So making sure that we're getting all of their background records that we wouldn't normally see and all their background protocols was a really valuable exercise for King County. Kind of felt like spring house cleaning. The other thing that Lorna emphasized was kind of the awareness level of King County management about this program. For a lot of the custodial agencies, the permit compliance was kind of background noise that some person over in a cubicle on the 6th floor was doing, but when it actually came to the point that the EPA was coming out to do an audit, our department directors and our division directors became very interested and very aware of the permit requirements that they had residing in their various departments and in their various divisions. One of the tools that we really took strong advantage of was the mock audit. We were able to actually borrow some staff from WSDOT, who was the first to go through and kind of lay out a mock audit process for us, and then we actually had staff within King County in our wastewater division that had been through an EPA audit, had seen what a mock audit looked like, and so we were able to go out and do a number of site visits, and a number of the divisions used this as a training tool for their staff. One of the other things that was really important was the interviews were going to be done with line staff. They weren't going to be done with managers. They weren't going to be done with supervisors. So it was very important that the line staff understood what the process was and how to handle questions that they didn't know the answer to, which was, I don't know, but I can get that answer for you. Just to wrap it up, it was really a valuable effort for us, especially the prep work, but certainly the report that we got from the EPA showed where our weaknesses were. We had 2 minor violations, but the areas of concern really highlighted where we have room for improvement. And I'm going to steal some thunder from Bill Leif here, who said, you as a permit manager already know where your weaknesses are. You don't need an EP audit to tell you where they are. And on that note, Bill?
Thank you, Doug. My name is Bill Leif, and I am the NPDES permit coordinator for Snohomish County, work in the Public Works Department. And there are, I guess, 3 things I two things I thought of to say, and then one thing that came out of listening to these smart folks here. One is the document preparation phase. You get this list of like a 27-line spreadsheet or something like that. Maybe it's 33 lines, 30 days before. And actually, for us, it was, I forget how many hundreds of gigabytes of documents, but it was a lot of stuff. And you have to pack it all together in an in some sort of organized pile, you know, literally or electronically, and send it to the folks by a date. And it takes a whole bunch of people who, some of whom felt like, why am I having to drop everything to do this? It's a lot of work. So don't overlook the amount of work that just preparing that amount of stuff will take. It's a good way to get everybody engaged. But a lot of people I was having to explain exactly what it was that was desired to people who felt like I was taking their time away from work, which I was, you know, so that's how it is. I'll reiterate what Doug said. If you're wondering what you need to worry about with your audit, just make the list, take 60 seconds and make a list of where you think your weak points are, and my sense is you're going to be 95% right at minimum, because this is not rocket science. You read the permit and you think, oh, we do all these things really good, and then those two things, you know, focus on those. You know, before you get audited, focus on those. That would be my advice, because you all know where that place is you hope the auditors don't go. You know, clean it up, like the permit says. The second thing is that, and this was something that took some reflection to figure out, was that the permit requires a lot of documents, procedures, adopted procedures, protocols, written kinds of things that look like, you know, they look like how you do it. But it doesn't require, in most cases, what I call project plans or program plans. And those, we turned out to not have some of those, and it wasn't a permit violation, but it would have been helpful. And what I would call a project plan, I'll give you a visual of what it is. It's the document that you wish you had when that one person who works for you, who's really, really good, who's doing like 3 one-person projects, because they're so good. And they're so good that a lot of people don't really know exactly what they do, and no questions ever get asked by management because they just get it done. And then they move to Tahiti, and they just go. And you look on their desk, and there's a bunch of protocols, and you think, I got a new person coming in on Monday. How do I explain what you know, Jonelle did? Because she's not taking calls, you know. She's not interested anymore. And nobody actually knows how she did her job and what she did, who she talked to, etc. Yeah, she used all these protocols, which were approved by, you know, the appropriate methods. But that kind of thing, in some cases, we ended up creating them orally on the spot to explain to auditors who really didn't know the permit, etc. And I think sometimes it kind of frustrated them, and it made it look like we were making it up as we go. And what we were making up was the explanation of the good program we had, but we didn't have a 10-page document that you could just send to them beforehand and say, here's our IDDE program. You know, here's really how we do it. So, and those are valuable for training and explaining to your bosses, like, what is this program again? Why should I give you money to do it? And everybody should have it, and you should also have like your emergency kit with a 3-day supply of water at your house. And everybody knows it, but you know, most people don't. So I advise it. And here's Kate.
So I'm Kate Rhoades. I'm the NPDES Permit Coordinator for the City of Seattle. As many people mentioned, they talked about the records request and all the materials that are requested ahead of time. Thank you. I wanted to make the point that organization is key for the audit. You end up with piles and piles and piles of material that they're going to want to look at. And the better organized you are, the better the outcome will be. I was able to when they ask for a specific document, just pull it right out of the pile and give it to them. So organization is really, really key. Another point I wanted to make is the schedule. Be prepared for the unexpected. They come and you can orchestrate the schedule as well as you possibly can. And the first thing they did for us was to change the schedule. So we had, people from other departments scheduled to come to this, the operation and maintenance session, and all of a sudden that's at a different time. So you need to really be prepared for the unexpected and have everybody ready whenever, that time of the audit is for their topic.
So that was kind of focused on process, and Doug touched on it a little bit, but as we come back down the row to lead into Rachel's outro, and then we'll open it up to questions, just a comment or two if you have it on the outcomes. People are curious, what did the audit say? If it wasn't terribly significant, you can just be brief and note if it changed anything or is likely to change anything internally. So just a little bit on the outcomes, and we'll bring it back to Rachel.
Okay, for the outcomes, for the City of Seattle, our audit was in July of 2013. We did not receive anything from EPA until August of 2014. So it was over a year in between the audit and when we actually received our letter from EPA. Significant outcomes for the City of Seattle, I think particularly significant is that City of Seattle did not receive a notice of violation, and we did not have an information request. I think that we were the only jurisdiction that did not get the notice of violation. However, there were some areas of concern that were noted in the report. The report actually identified a lot of areas that were significant and gave the City of Seattle kudos for their well-developed source control and IDDE program, as well as having very well-documented programs that we were able to demonstrate through the audit. I think lessons learned, as everyone else has said, use the audit as an educational tool. It's a great opportunity to get management support in getting things done on the ground that you've been wanting to have done for a long time.
Well, we did receive a notice of violation, and having never received an audit before and being in a group of people who had never been audited before, we were kind of making it up as we go. But we got this notice of violation, which I immediately turned over to our attorney's office, because you get a notice of violation from the EPA. It's not mine. And it's like, hey, somebody's got to handle this. And so there was quite a stir. And it turns out there was some, in our attorney's mind, factual errors with regard to things that were called violations, et cetera, et cetera. But when the fur kind of settled, the outcomes, I would say, that were sort of visible from our audit was we had some dirty places that might have been a little cleaner, but it wasn't anything that was particularly shocking in my mind. And a few people, I think, got told, that, hey, the EPA was not happy with this little setup you have here over in the back, back 40 of the road maintenance shop. And so it was a good message for them to get. But one of the other things that happened that ties into my my statement about the project plans, and this wasn't really visible to the auditors, I don't think. Because they were young, and frankly, ours were inexperienced. We had young, contractors in their 20s flying out from Boulder, who didn't know the Washington permit. But what we saw afterwards, what I saw afterwards with the programs I worked closely with, was those little gaps where everything looks right, except I started to say, God, they haven't asked about how this person knows if that happens when this person does something, and they should. And it's probably going on, but we don't have any documentation of it and I'm not really sure it's fully wired tight. So I got some key information about how to just improve, to make things a little more seamless among the the projects in our budget and organizational structure that are the sort of the manifestations of the permit. So, Doug?
Thank you. Our turnaround time from Ecology was similar to Kate's. Took about a year for it to get to us. One thing I do want to point out is that the information request covers all of your programs, whereas the site visit only covers a subset. I think we had 5 of our programs looked at, and so that's important to remember when you're looking at what the results were. We did get a notice of violation. One was based on the information request and one was based on the site visit. They couldn't tell from our training records if we had trained all the staff that needed to be trained, and I knew that when I sent the records in. King County has PeopleSoft for their information on training, so I'll leave it there. It doesn't work. The other was that we had a Coyer log that was not staked down. And it turned out that it wasn't the fault of the crew, it was the fault of the engineer who indicated that they didn't want the Coyer log staked down and didn't put it on the plans. What we've learned is that we had 5 areas of concern and we had 5 areas that we excel in. So it was a wash. What we've done as a result of that is we have tried to institute a program in which we can resolve who needs to be trained, when they were trained, who trained them, what they got trained on, etc. It's an uphill battle. Again, King County has PeopleSoft. The other thing we got as an area of concern that really resonated with me was that we had duplicate programs in various custodial agencies. And as a result, we had duplicate documents, duplicate processes, duplicate here, duplicate there. And the question was, couldn't you centralize that? And the answer was, yes, we could, but it's going to mean pulling programs out of wastewater and solid waste and roads and putting them in water and lands. And that's not just a process issue, that's a policy, political, and economic issue. So we instituted a program that we're starting this year, which we're calling Casper, because we're friendly. And what we're doing is we're going to be going around to our various custodial agencies, really digging in on their documentation and taking the best and using those as the standard for the rest of the county. We think this is going to take a couple of years because we're doing it on top of what we already do.
So my comments initially were on the best part of the audit, and the outcome is necessarily the most disappointing part of the audit for Tacoma. And the reason I say that, and this was shared in our response back to EPA after we received the notice of violation, because Tacoma did receive a notice of violation also. And I think our disappointment stemmed from the fact of, you guys are maybe aware that Tacoma has a Superfund site right in its heart, the Theophos Waterway. 13 years of stormwater monitoring, demonstrated data with water quality improvements, and also, by the way, I'll be talking about that at 3 o'clock in the library. But, and so I guess we were disappointed. The notice of violation really looked hard at some of our city sites, city-owned sites, looked hard at our SWIPs. There were things in the SWIPs that were said that were not necessarily on the ground. That would be my advice to you, is if you say you're doing it, make sure you're doing it, or else fix your SWIP to not say you're doing it. So that's really good advice. And so I guess what we were looking for and hoping for is some sort of strange validation of Tacoma's stormwater management program as a whole. And what I want to share with you, because staff come up to me often, or they did after the audit, and said, Lorna, what meaning? What just happened? What's the meaning? Are we okay? Are we bad? Are we good? What is it? And I didn't really have an answer, but thinking in preparation for this presentation, I think what, in my mind, the NPDES Municipal Phase I permit is, as you guys have mentioned, it's a series of very prescriptive requirements and deadlines. It's a bunch of things. And so an audit will necessarily be a check of those things. And I think that, you know, go through the audit, it's a check of those things. Yes, it helps you address those things, but as a validation, an assessment of your program as a whole, it's not intended to do that. The permit doesn't look at your infrastructure and how you're affecting flooding and all these other things that we do as stormwater managers in our jurisdictions. And so that's my biggest lesson from the thing.
So before I close with a few more comments from Ecology, I guess I am reminded of the seriously good and hard work that went into preparing for and on the ground, you know, experiencing the audits that the Phase I's and all of their staff and managers went through. And thanks for that. That was good. Needed to happen, I guess. Okay. So a couple things from Ecology. Like I said, I started out by saying, hey, you know, we used it as an opportunity to get some training on audits. And so we are thinking now about what an audit program would look like when Ecology does it here in Washington State. You know, EPA's audits really covered a very broad scope where, you know, most of the program elements were evaluated over 2 days. And this meant that, you know, certain things were really touched at a fairly superficial level, not necessarily in depth. And this may also have led to more logistical challenges, just more different teams and groups of folks to bring in and push out and move on from point to point or topic to topic. And so we're really looking at, do we want to go broad like that, or do we want to go deep and pick maybe 1 or 2 or 3, a limited set of topics to get into. We think that maybe going a little bit deeper and fewer topics would allow us to more fully evaluate implementation and compliance deeper into a program element. And we also think it might take less time for the permittees and less time for Ecology. We also think that selecting, we're talking about, you know, well, if we select an audit, a topic to audit, should that be informed by a permittee's compliance history on that topic? You know, in other words, we as permit managers generally know where your weak spots are too. Should we pick those? Might be a good experience to do that. All right. In terms of a couple of details that, you know, in terms of like things you could go walk away with and maybe think about implementing, a couple of things that we, you know, kind of generated. There are 3 I wanted to hit on. Some of them are hit here and I'll just reinforce them. So 1, how do you document your program, right? There's a difference between providing a written summary of how you do things and actually having the documents that show you do it. So those are checklists that are filled out, site inspection checklists that are filled out, has the date, the name of the inspector on it, what went into the database or what have you. Similarly, I'll go off on the database for a minute. A lot of databases, you get a lot of information in them, but do you actually extract info from them? How do you use that database to schedule your follow-up inspections? Do you use the information in there to prioritize work and what needs to happen next? We've seen some examples, I've seen some presentations that do that. So just note, if your documentation is not clear or you don't have those checklists, it's just going to take that much longer between an auditor and the actual inspector trying to figure out what in fact they do. All right, let's hit a little bit on O&M and those facilities with SWIPs. Lorna, you highlighted that one. I wanted to reemphasize it. If your SWIP says, you know, the permit does allow a generic SWIP that can be applied at multiple sites. It does allow that. However, if it's too generic, it's not going to work. So your SWIP still has to have an actual site map of the actual site and the pollution generating activities on that site and how that drainage is set up on that site. The staff who use that site need to have some training, some documented training in the BMPs that need to be used for that site. And as Lorna said, if your SWIP says that, you know, something is going to be covered, even if you've decided on an individual site, you know, covering is redundant, we don't really need it here, don't let your SWIP say it needs covered. Because you've already decided it didn't. Make sure your SWIP documents exactly what you are to be doing on that individual site. The other thing I'll highlight is something that the auditors didn't pay attention to, but I observed, I'm not sure how well we would have fared had we did pay attention to it. And that is that the permit does explicitly require a periodic visual observation of discharges from those sites that have SWIPs, from those facilities that have SWIPs. Do you have documentation of your periodic visual, you know, observation of those discharges and how it has helped you evaluate the effectiveness of the BMPs on your site? All right, and then the third topic area before I stop and we'll take questions is really all about that internal communication and knowledge. You know, as you all know, the first cycle has been all about telling people, hey, this isn't about a public works permit. This permit applies to all of our city or county jurisdiction or departments and divisions within those departments. And that adequate communication between and within department management and staff about permit requirements is really necessary to make sure that things are implemented. So you want to make sure that your managers are talking about the right permit when they're in that opening session meeting. You don't want them to all of a sudden start talking about some other permit that isn't the MS4 permit. You know, keep that straight. You know, we saw that sometimes communication between field staff and office staff was really clunky, and that's obviously an area where a program can break down. And then different departments, so this was hit on, you know, different departments and division have different tools. They're doing it slightly different ways. Are we reinventing the wheel each time? Is there a way to gather up the strengths and put one program together that'll work for everybody? And certainly, you want to make sure that folks know the lingo. So that's part of training, right? You want to make sure your site plan reviewers know the difference between a construction SWIP and an actual stormwater site plan. Certain things like that, if the lingo isn't quite right, it's a red flag. It's a red flag for an auditor. It can point to inadequate training or just really lack of familiarity with what's going on.